My name is Hannah Mercer. I'm 31 years old. On September 12, 2024, 3 days before my birthday, I stood in my mother's kitchen at exactly 6:32 p.m. with a grocery bag still hanging from my wrist while the smell of roasted chicken and cinnamon candles filled the room. The decorations I'd spent 2 weeks planning were stacked in neat cardboard boxes beside the dining table, each one labeled in black marker with my handwriting. My mother didn't even look at them. She slid her phone across the counter instead. "I canceled your birthday," she said. "Not the venue. Not the dinner. My birthday." I looked down at the screen. My reservation confirmation from the Harbor House in Traverse City had been replaced with a cancellation notice. The bakery order I'd prepaid for was gone. The florist had already refunded the deposit. Every notification carried the same timestamp. 5:47 p.m. Before I'd even gotten off work. My younger sister, Chloe, leaned against the refrigerator wearing the same satisfied smile she'd worn our entire lives whenever something that belonged to me somehow became hers. Mom folded her arms. "Chloe needs us more." Chloe laughed under her breath. "You've had 31 birthdays already. This is my engagement weekend. Stop making everything about yourself." I didn't answer. Mom took another step closer. "Honestly, Hannah, nobody wants to spend money celebrating someone who never gave this family anything." Those words hung in the room longer than the silence that followed them. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't remind them that I'd paid for nearly everything sitting in that kitchen. I quietly picked up the cardboard box filled with unopened decorations, carried it back to my car, and closed the trunk with both hands. Neither of them noticed I also took the small white envelope that had been sitting beneath the ribbon spools. They thought it was another receipt. It wasn't. Inside that envelope was something my grandmother had left for me 6 months earlier. Something she had specifically instructed me never to reveal unless my mother forced me to walk away. They had no idea that my birthday wasn't the only thing waiting 3 days away. By the following Monday morning, my mother would be standing in front of strangers asking how everything had disappeared. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to rescue her. Before I tell you how the family that erased my birthday ended up losing far more than a party, please take a second to like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from right now. People always assume there has to be one terrible moment that destroys a family. One fight. One betrayal. One unforgettable day. That wasn't true for us. Our family broke itself apart in tiny pieces, over decades, until there wasn't enough left to save. I was born on September 15, 1993, in Traverse City, Michigan, 12 minutes before sunrise. My father, Richard Mercer, worked as a commercial electrician. My mother, Elaine Mercer, taught second grade at a nearby elementary school. For the first 4 years of my life, every photograph tells the same story. Mom smiling. Dad laughing. Me sitting between them. Then Chloe arrived. People like to joke that every family has a favorite child. Our family never treated it like a joke. It was policy. The first time I understood it, I was 7 years old. It was December 22, 2000. The living room smelled like fresh pine from the Christmas tree Dad had cut down himself. Colored lights reflected against the old hardwood floor while Grandma Margaret Ellis, 71 years old and recently retired from 38 years as the town librarian, sat beside the fireplace knitting another blanket no one had asked for but everyone eventually loved. She watched everything. More importantly, she remembered everything. Mom handed Chloe a huge wrapped box covered in silver paper. Inside was the bicycle she'd wanted all year. Brand new. Purple frame. White tires. Little basket on the front. I clapped for her. Then Mom handed me a small envelope. Inside was $20. I looked up. "Where's my present?" Mom didn't even hesitate. We couldn't afford two big gifts. Dad looked uncomfortable but stayed quiet. Chloe rode circles through the driveway that afternoon while I sat on the porch counting the folds in the $20 bill because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Grandma walked outside carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She sat beside me without saying anything for almost 5 minutes. Finally she asked, "Do you know why librarians always write names inside books?" I shook my head. So no one can pretend the story belonged to someone else. I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. She reached into her sweater pocket and quietly handed me another envelope. Inside was exactly $80. "Now you have enough for the bicycle you wanted." I stared at her. "You don't have to tell anyone." "I can't take this." She smiled. "That's why I'm giving it to you." She wasn't trying to replace my parents. She was trying to make sure disappointment didn't become normal. Unfortunately, it already had. By middle school, the rules of our family had become predictable. If Chloe forgot homework, Mom drove it to school. If I forgot homework, I was told responsibility builds character. If Chloe got a C, Dad hired her a tutor. If I brought home straight A's, Mom nodded once and asked whether I'd cleaned the bathroom. At 13, I asked why things were always different. Mom looked at me over the sink while washing dishes. "Because Chloe needs more encouragement." "What about me?" "You're independent." It sounded like a compliment. It wasn't. It became permission to expect everything from me while giving everything to someone else. Grandma Margaret noticed before anyone else admitted it. Every Wednesday after school, she'd pick me up in her faded blue 2002 Ford Taurus. We'd stop at a little diner on Front Street where the waitress, Linda Brooks, 58 years old, already knew Grandma wanted black coffee and I always ordered grilled cheese with tomato soup. Grandma never asked about grades first. She asked different questions. "What made you laugh today? What disappointed you? What are you pretending doesn't hurt?" Nobody else had ever asked me that. One rainy afternoon when I was 15, I finally answered honestly. "I think Mom wishes Chloe had been born first." Grandma stirred her coffee for several seconds before speaking. "No." I looked up. "Your mother wishes life was easier." "I don't understand." "Some people mistake the strongest child for the one who needs the least love." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "They're wrong every single time." Those Wednesdays became the safest hours of my week. Grandma never told me my parents were terrible people. She simply reminded me that fairness and love weren't always the same thing. Looking back now, I realize she wasn't preparing me to hate my family. She was preparing me to survive them. And although I couldn't see it then, she had already started putting something aside for me. Not money. Not jewelry. Not an inheritance. A way out. A way none of the rest of us would understand until years later. I walked into high school believing one thing that turned out to be completely wrong. I thought if I worked hard enough, eventually my parents would notice. For a long time, that belief kept me going. I joined the debate team because Dad once mentioned he admired confident people. I volunteered at the public library because Grandma Margaret loved books more than television. I worked weekends at Harbor Bean Cafe starting at 16, earning $10.25 an hour, because I wanted to pay for my own school supplies without asking anyone. Every achievement felt like another application for my parents' approval. Every achievement came back stamped with the same answer. Rejected. One afternoon in May 2010, I came home carrying an envelope with my acceptance into the National Honor Society. The letter was folded so many times it had begun to soften around the edges. I'd read it at least 20 times during the bus ride home. Mom was setting the dining table. "Dad home yet?" I asked. No. I got accepted. She barely glanced up. That's nice. Just then Chloe burst through the front door. She had made junior varsity cheerleading. Mom dropped the serving spoon onto the counter and wrapped her in a hug. Oh, sweetheart. I knew you could do it. Dad came home 10 minutes later. Mom met him in the hallway before he'd even taken off his boots. Guess what your little girl did? He laughed, picked Chloe up off the floor, and spun her around. No one mentioned my letter. Not once. That evening I quietly placed the acceptance certificate inside the drawer of my desk. Grandma found it a week later. You didn't tell me. I didn't think it mattered. She looked at me with an expression I'd come to recognize. Not pity. Disappointment. Not in me. In the adults who should have been paying attention. You know what the worst kind of loneliness is? She asked. I shrugged. The kind that happens while you're sitting in a room full of family. Those words stayed with me for years. By the time I graduated high school in June 2011, I'd saved $8,460 from working weekends and summer shifts. Every dollar had a purpose. College. Freedom. Distance. Mom had a different plan. One Sunday afternoon she spread several bills across the kitchen table. The mortgage is behind. Dad stared at the floor. Mom looked at me. You're not using that money immediately. I already knew where the conversation was going. You want me to help. We're family. She always used that word when she wanted something. Never when she was expected to give something. I looked at Dad. He didn't say anything. Not because he agreed. Because silence had become his favorite language. How much? I asked. Mom answered without hesitation. 6,000. I felt something sink inside me. That account represented 3 years of waking up before sunrise, covering extra shifts, missing parties, eating instant noodles instead of going out with friends. It represented every sacrifice I'd made believing education would change my life. Grandma happened to arrive 15 minutes later carrying homemade peach pie. She knew something was wrong before anyone spoke. What happened? Mom answered first. Hannah's helping with the house. Grandma turned toward me. Are you? I opened my mouth. Then closed it. She didn't ask another question. Instead she asked Mom. How much? 6,000. Grandma nodded once. I'll write the check. Mom blinked. What? I said I'll write the check. You don't have to. No. Her voice became unusually firm. Hannah has already contributed enough to this family. The room became painfully quiet. Mom forced a smile. Margaret, we're only borrowing it. Grandma looked directly at her daughter. You've been borrowing from Hannah since she learned how to say yes. Nobody answered. On the drive home, Grandma finally broke the silence. You know why I paid instead of letting you? Why? Because I wanted your future to survive one more day. College was the first place where I learned life could feel ordinary. I attended Michigan State University, studying business administration. Nothing extraordinary happened there. No movie moments. No dramatic transformations. I simply discovered what normal looked like. People invited me to birthday dinners. Roommates remembered my favorite coffee. Friends asked if I wanted to join them instead of assuming I'd stay behind to clean up. It was almost unsettling. One afternoon my roommate, Rachel Kim, 20 years old and studying architecture, looked genuinely confused. Why do you apologize every time you ask for something? I do. You asked if you could use your own microwave. I laughed. Then stopped laughing. Because she was right. Growing up had taught me every request required permission. Every kindness created debt. Every compliment came with conditions. Rachel never understood that. Neither did my economics professor, Dr. Stephen Alvarez, 53 years old. After class one afternoon, he stopped me. You always leave before everyone else. I have work. Every day? I have 2 jobs. He nodded. You're trying to outrun something. I smiled politely. I just like staying busy. He smiled back. No. He had seen hundreds of students over the years. I think busy feels safer than being still. For weeks I thought about that sentence. Busy did feel safer. When I was busy, no one could ask me to fix their problems. Then Chloe called. She never called unless she wanted something. It was August 18, 2014, around 8:13 p.m. Hannah. She sounded unusually cheerful. Can you help me? Of course. There it was. What happened? I need $500. What for? I accidentally overused my credit card. How? I'll pay you back. She ignored the question. Against my better judgment, I sent it. 3 months later she needed another $900. Then $1,200. Then Mom called asking if I could temporarily cover Chloe's rent. Dad needed help replacing his truck. The washing machine broke. The roof leaked. Every family emergency somehow arrived at my apartment. Every repayment somehow disappeared. I started keeping a notebook. Date. Amount. Reason. Total. By January 2018, the final number read $21,840. Not $1 had been repaid. I never mentioned it. Not because I forgot. Because I finally understood something. People who feel entitled to your sacrifices rarely remember them. Grandma Margaret was 89 when she asked me to visit her one rainy afternoon. She'd moved into a small brick house on 818 Cherry Bend Road after selling the family farmhouse years earlier. The living room still smelled like old paperbacks, peppermint tea, and cedar furniture polish. She poured 2 cups of tea. Her hands shook more than they used to. Hannah. Yeah? I need you to promise me something. I promise. You don't even know what it is. I know you. She smiled softly. Then she reached into the drawer beside her chair and removed a plain white envelope. No writing. No stamp. Nothing remarkable. Don't open this. I looked confused. Keep it somewhere safe. What is it? You'll know. When? When your mother finally gives you a reason to stop trying. I stared at the envelope. Grandma. She gently covered my hand with hers. Some doors only open after another one closes. I wanted to ask more questions. Instead, she changed the subject. She asked about work. About Rachel. About whether I was eating enough vegetables. She never mentioned the envelope again. Neither did I. But that night, I placed it inside my apartment safe beside my passport and birth certificate. For years it stayed there untouched. Waiting. Just like Grandma said. Waiting for the day my family finally crossed the one line they could never uncross. The call came on March 4, 2024, at exactly 9:13 a.m. I knew before I answered. Grandma Margaret never called during the morning. She said mornings belonged to coffee, newspapers, and birds. When I saw St. Joseph Medical Center on my screen instead of her name, my hands stopped moving over my keyboard. I answered anyway. A calm voice introduced herself. "This is Nurse Allison Reed. Are you Hannah Mercer?" "Yes." "I'm very sorry." The rest of the sentence blurred into a quiet hum. I remember hearing words like peacefully, early this morning, and family notified. But none of them landed. I stared through the office window while people continued walking outside as though the world hadn't just become smaller. My manager, David Monroe, 46 years old, noticed my face from across the room. "Hannah?" I couldn't answer. He walked over. "Go." Don't worry about work." He picked up my office keys from the desk and gently placed them into my purse. "I'll handle everything." Sometimes kindness doesn't arrive with speeches. Sometimes someone simply tells you to go home. The funeral took place on March 9, 2024. It rained from sunrise until almost noon. Exactly the kind of soft spring rain Grandma always loved because she believed flowers listened better afterward. The church overflowed with people. Former students. Neighbors. Retired teachers. Children who had grown into adults and still remembered the librarian who always recommended the perfect book. I stood quietly near the back. Mom cried loudly. Chloe cried louder. Neither of them had visited Grandma in nearly 3 months. People notice those things, even when they don't say them aloud. After the service, an elderly man approached me. He introduced himself as Thomas Garrison, 78 years old. "I served on the library board with your grandmother." He smiled gently. "She talked about you constantly." "I hope only good things." "The best." He reached into his jacket pocket. "She asked me to remind you of something if she wasn't here to do it herself." I frowned. "What was it?" He repeated the sentence slowly. "Don't let guilt become rent for a house you no longer live in." Then he walked away before I could ask another question. That was Grandma. Always leaving people with puzzles instead of instructions. Life became quiet after the funeral. Not peaceful. Just quieter. I threw myself into work. By then I was a senior operations analyst for a regional healthcare company earning $86,000 a year. I rented a modest townhouse on Birchwood Avenue, drove a 5-year-old Honda Accord, and spent most evenings reading instead of watching television. It wasn't glamorous. It was stable. After growing up in chaos, stability felt luxurious. For almost 2 months my family barely contacted me. I should have known silence never lasted. On May 28, 2024, Mom called. Her voice sounded unusually sweet. "Hannah, honey." She only used honey when she wanted something expensive. "What happened?" "Oh, nothing happened." I waited. Then she sighed dramatically. "Chloe's engaged." I heard. "Aren't you excited?" "I'm happy for her. We're planning an engagement celebration." "That's nice." Another pause. Then, "We're a little short." "Of course." "How much?" Mom answered as though she'd rehearsed it. $8,000. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the number sounded absurd. "I can't." "You can." "No." "Hannah, she's your sister." "I've already helped." Mom's tone changed instantly. "Families sacrifice. So do banks." Silence. Then came the line she'd used my entire life. "We did so much for you growing up." I looked around my empty living room. The bookshelf I'd assembled myself. The dining table I'd bought secondhand. the framed college diploma I'd paid for. I quietly asked, "What exactly did you do for me?" She hung up. 3 days later, Chloe called instead. "You embarrassed Mom." I answered honestly. "You've always been jealous." I almost asked what she'd ever seen me jealous of. Instead, I listened. "You think because you have a career you're better than us." "No. You've never supported me." I glanced toward the notebook inside my desk drawer. $21,840. Years of support. None remembered. "I hope your engagement goes well." Then I ended the call. For the first time in my life, I didn't apologize afterward. Summer passed. Then, in late August, another invitation arrived. A birthday dinner. Mine. Hosted by Mom. The invitation surprised me enough that I almost smiled. Maybe things were changing. Maybe Grandma's death had forced everyone to rethink what mattered. I should have known better. The dinner was scheduled for September 15th at the Harbor House, overlooking the bay. Mom insisted on organizing everything. "You've always planned everyone else's celebrations," she said. "This year let us take care of you." I believed her. Against every instinct. I believed her. I even contributed. I reserved the private dining room using my credit card because Mom said the restaurant required one. I prepaid $1,740 for 22 guests. I ordered a custom cake from Sweet Harbor Bakery. I hired a local violinist for the evening because Grandma had loved live music. I bought navy blue decorations. Simple. Elegant. Nothing extravagant. For 2 weeks I worked during the day and spent evenings assembling centerpieces by hand. Every ribbon reminded me of Grandma teaching me how to wrap Christmas gifts without wasting tape. Every candle reminded me of the Wednesday dinners we'd shared. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was trying to create one peaceful memory. Just one. Then came September 12th. 3 days before my birthday. The moment everything collapsed. After leaving my mother's house with the boxes in my trunk, I drove aimlessly along the shoreline until the sun disappeared behind the water. I parked near Bryant Park. Turned off the engine. And sat there. No music. No phone. Nothing. I finally reached into my purse. The white envelope rested exactly where I'd slipped it after taking it from Mom's kitchen. For nearly 6 years, I had never opened it. Grandma had asked me not to. Now, for the first time, her condition had been fulfilled. When your mother finally gives you a reason to stop trying. I carefully broke the seal. Inside were 3 items. A handwritten letter. A small brass key. And a folded legal document bearing the letterhead of an estate attorney. I unfolded the letter first. Grandma's handwriting was instantly recognizable. Steady. Patient. Confident. The first sentence stole the air from my lungs. "If you're reading this, they finally chose Chloe over you one time too many." I had to stop reading. Not because I was crying. Because Grandma had known. Years before it happened. She had known exactly how the story would unfold. And she had already decided how it would end. If you've ever been the child who was always expected to sacrifice while someone else received the credit, type enough in the comments. I want to know we're not alone in this. I set the letter on the passenger seat and closed my eyes for a long moment. The waves rolled against the shoreline only a few yards away. Cars came and went behind me. Someone laughed in the distance. The world kept moving. Mine had stopped. When I picked the letter up again, I forced myself to read every word. My dearest Hannah, I hope I'm wrong. I hope you never need this envelope. I hope one day your mother apologizes, your sister grows up, and you discover I worried for nothing. But librarians learn to trust patterns. And people rarely change the ending unless they first admit the beginning. For years, I watched you become the family's emergency fund, unpaid therapist, babysitter, peacemaker, and apology machine. Every time you stood up, someone reminded you to sit back down. Every time you succeeded, someone handed your success to Chloe. One day they'll ask you for something they have no right to ask. When that day comes, don't say yes. I swallowed hard before continuing. Years ago I made arrangements that no one in the family knows about except my attorney. The brass key opened safe deposit box 214 at Great Lakes Community Bank. Inside you'll find everything you'll need. Use it only after you choose yourself. Not before. Love without respect becomes permission. Don't give anyone that permission again. I folded the letter with shaking hands. The legal document underneath named the attorney handling Grandma's estate. Rebecca Collins. Age 54. Estate attorney. Downtown Traverse City. An appointment time had already been written in blue ink. September 13th. 10 a.m. The very next morning. Grandma had planned this years in advance. I barely slept that night. At 9:48 a.m. the following morning, I walked into Collins and Whitmore law offices carrying the envelope inside my purse. The receptionist smiled politely. You must be Miss Mercer. I am. Ms. Collins has been expecting you. That sentence stopped me. Expecting me? Since 2019. A few minutes later Rebecca Collins greeted me herself. She had silver hair pulled into a neat bun and spoke with the calm confidence of someone who'd spent decades helping families argue over money. She offered coffee. I declined. She unlocked a file cabinet instead. Margaret Ellis was one of the most organized clients I've ever represented. She smiled softly. And one of the wisest. She placed several folders across the table. I assumed something happened. I nodded. My mother canceled my birthday so she could pay for my sister's engagement weekend. Rebecca sighed. Margaret believed it would be something like that. I almost laughed through my disbelief. She actually predicted that? Not the birthday. Rebecca tapped the folders. The pattern. An hour later we arrived at Great Lakes Community Bank. The brass key fit perfectly. Safe deposit box 214 opened with a quiet metallic click. Inside wasn't cash. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't some hidden fortune. Instead, it contained documents. Perfectly organized. Every page labeled. Every receipt dated. Every letter copied. Rebecca quietly spread them across the table. There were handwritten journals stretching back nearly 20 years. Grandma had documented everything she'd witnessed. Every loan I'd given my parents. Every birthday ignored. Every conversation where I was pressured into paying someone else's bills. Even copies of checks she'd written to protect my college savings. Then Rebecca slid forward a thick blue folder. This is the important one. Inside was Grandma's final estate amendment. My eyes moved slowly across the pages. The house on Cherry Bend Road. Investment accounts. Certificates of deposit. Life insurance. Savings. Everything totaled just over $1,487,000. I stared without speaking. Rebecca waited. Finally, I whispered. I don't understand. Margaret sold inherited farmland years ago. I knew that. She invested exceptionally well. I looked at the total again. Then at the final page. The beneficiary section. My name appeared alone. I searched for Chloe. Nothing. Mom. Nothing. Dad. Nothing. Rebecca folded her hands. Margaret intentionally excluded them. Why? She handed me another sealed letter. For that answer. The second letter was much shorter. Hannah. Inheritance isn't a reward. It's responsibility. I'm not leaving this to the child who needed the most. I'm leaving it to the one I trusted. If Elaine complains, remind her that parents divide gifts. Consequences divide themselves. Don't argue. Don't explain. Simply live. I folded the page. Neither Rebecca nor I spoke for nearly a minute. Then she said something I'll never forget. You know. What? Most people inherit money. You inherited permission. 3 days later. My birthday arrived. No phone calls. No cake. No family dinner. Nothing. I spent the afternoon signing legal documents. Then I took myself to lunch. I ordered Grandma's favorite tomato soup. For the first birthday in years. Nobody asked me to pay for someone else. It was strangely peaceful. That evening Mom finally called. We've been trying to reach you. I know. Why didn't you answer? I was busy. Doing what? Living. Silence. Then. We need another favor. Of course they did. Chloe's engagement venue had demanded another deposit. They were short again. Mom wanted $12,500. I won't be sending money anymore. You owe this family. No. We raised you. You housed me. Her breathing changed. What did you say? You heard me. She hung up without another word. For the first time. I didn't call back. The next week Rebecca called with unexpected news. There will be a formal estate reading. I thought everything was finalized. It is. But Margaret specifically requested every immediate family member attend. When? September 27th. Why? Rebecca smiled slightly. She left instructions. What kind of instructions? You'll find out with everyone else. I looked out my office window. The trees had already started changing color. Grandma loved autumn. She always said leaves never apologized for becoming what they were meant to become. Maybe. Neither should I. The conference room at Collins and Whitmore overlooked West Grand Traverse Bay. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, and the September sunlight reflected off the water so brightly that people kept squinting whenever they looked outside. I arrived 15 minutes early. Rebecca Collins was already arranging folders across the polished walnut table. There were 6 chairs. 1 for me. 1 for Rebecca. 3 for my parents and Chloe. And 1 for Michael Donnelly, 62 years old, the certified public accountant who had managed Grandma Margaret's investments for nearly 2 decades. At exactly 10 a.m., the conference room door opened. Mom walked in first. She wore a cream-colored blazer that she'd probably bought for Chloe's engagement photos. Dad followed quietly with both hands in his pockets. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller somehow. Chloe entered last, wearing a large diamond engagement ring and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had spent her entire life expecting good news. No one greeted me. Mom simply looked around the room. Where's the paperwork? Rebecca remained calm. We'll begin shortly. Everyone sat. The silence felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Rebecca opened the first folder. As you know, we're here to formally review the estate of Margaret Ellis. Mom nodded impatiently. We already know she loved us. Rebecca didn't respond. She simply continued reading. The first several pages covered routine legal matters. Insurance. Taxes. Outstanding utilities. Then came the distributions. Grandma had left small charitable donations to the public library, the local animal shelter, and a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. Mom smiled politely. I'm glad she remembered the community. Rebecca turned another page. Now we'll address the remaining estate. The room became still. Rebecca looked directly at my mother. Margaret Ellis amended her will on April 15, 2019. Mom frowned. I don't remember that. She wasn't required to inform anyone. Rebecca continued. The entirety of the remaining estate, including the residence at 818 Cherry Bend Road, all investment accounts, certificates of deposit, and liquid assets totaling approximately $1,487,000, has been left to Hannah Mercer. No one moved. Not immediately. It was almost as if the sentence needed time to settle before anyone understood it. Then Chloe laughed. Very funny. Rebecca didn't smile. This is the legally executed document. Mom leaned forward. No. Rebecca calmly slid certified copies across the table. Mom grabbed the papers. She scanned the first page. Then another. Then another. Her face slowly lost its color. This has to be a mistake. It isn't. My mother wouldn't do this. Rebecca answered quietly. She did. Chloe looked toward me. You knew. I met her eyes. I found out after Grandma passed away. Liar. I didn't answer. Rebecca continued. Margaret also left written instructions to be read aloud. She unfolded a handwritten page. Even before hearing the words, I recognized Grandma's handwriting. Steady. Neat. Unmistakably hers. Rebecca began reading. To my daughter Elaine. Mom straightened in her chair. Love without fairness eventually becomes ownership. Mom's expression hardened. Rebecca continued. You loved Hannah most when she was useful. No one spoke. You loved Chloe most when she was comfortable. Chloe looked away. Neither of those things is love. The room fell completely silent. Rebecca kept reading. If you're hearing this, then Hannah finally stopped rescuing people determined to drown her beside them. Dad lowered his head. I watched his hands tighten around each other. Rebecca finished the letter. Do not ask Hannah to share this inheritance. She has already shared enough of her life. Another silence. Longer this time. Finally, Mom slammed the papers onto the table. This is manipulation. Rebecca remained perfectly composed. No. This isn't what Margaret wanted. Rebecca looked directly at her. It is exactly what Margaret wanted. Mom turned toward me. You can't seriously keep all of this. I spoke for the first time since the meeting began. Yes. She stared at me. After everything we've done? I asked the same question I'd asked months earlier. What exactly did you do? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in my life. She didn't have an answer. Chloe stood. Abruptly. This is because you've always hated me. No. You wanted this. No. You planned this. I shook my head once. Grandma planned this. She pointed toward me. You're tearing this family apart. Michael Donnelly finally spoke. It was the first time he'd said anything all morning. No. Everyone looked at him. He adjusted his glasses. I worked with Margaret for 19 years. He folded his hands. Families don't fall apart because one person finally says no. The room became quiet again. They fall apart because too many people spent years expecting yes. Even Rebecca nodded. Dad surprised everyone. Especially me. He slowly stood from his chair. Then he looked at me. I'm sorry. Those 2 words carried more weight than every birthday card he'd ever forgotten to buy. Mom turned toward him. Richard. He raised one hand. No. She stared. He continued looking at me. I should have protected you. His voice cracked. I didn't. I believed him. Not because it erased the past. Because it was the first honest thing I'd heard from him in years. I nodded once. Neither of us cried. Some losses are too old for tears. Mom gathered her purse. This isn't over. Rebecca answered before I could. Legally. She closed the file. It is. Mom stormed toward the door. Chloe followed without another word. Dad remained standing for several seconds. Then he quietly walked over to me. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply placed something on the table. A faded photograph. It showed me and Grandma building a snowman when I was 8 years old. I found this in the garage. He smiled sadly. I thought you should have it. Then he walked away. That was the last time I saw all 3 of them together. The months that followed were quieter than I ever imagined possible. There were no dramatic lawsuits. No television-style confrontations. Rebecca had anticipated every legal challenge before it could begin. The estate closed without issue. I sold neither the house nor Grandma's books. Instead, I moved into the home on Cherry Bend Road. Every room still carried traces of her. Pressed flowers inside old novels. Handwritten recipe cards tucked into kitchen drawers. A cardigan hanging behind the bedroom door. Sometimes healing doesn't look like moving on. Sometimes it looks like staying somewhere that finally feels safe. I left my corporate position the following spring. Not because I had to. Because I wanted my time back. Using part of the inheritance, I established the Margaret Ellis Community Reading Fund, providing free books and literacy grants to children across Grand Traverse County. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was simply something Grandma would have smiled at. The remaining investments stayed exactly where they were. Michael Donnelly continued managing them. Your grandmother believed slow growth outlasts loud decisions, he reminded me more than once. He was right. One afternoon in June 2025, I received a handwritten envelope. The return address surprised me. Dad. Inside was a single page. I'm renting a small apartment now. Your mother and I separated last winter. I don't expect forgiveness. I only wanted you to know that I finally understood what silence costs. I hope you're happy. There wasn't a request for money. There wasn't an excuse. Just honesty. For the first time. I placed the letter inside Grandma's old cedar chest beside her 2 envelopes. Not because the stories were the same. Because together they reminded me that truth often arrives years after it's needed. People sometimes ask whether I regret walking away from my family. I tell them no. I regret how long I stayed where love was measured by usefulness. Family isn't defined by the people who demand the most from you. It's defined by the people who make you feel safe enough to become yourself. Grandma understood that long before I did. She didn't rescue me with money. She rescued me with permission. Permission to stop apologizing. Permission to stop earning affection. Permission to leave the table when I was the only one paying for dinner. Every year on September 15th, I celebrate my birthday the same way. I bake Grandma's tomato and herb bread. I light one simple white candle. I walk to the bay just before sunset. And before I leave the house, I open the small cedar box where I keep the brass key that unlocked safe deposit box 214. Not because I need what's inside anymore. Because it reminds me of the day one quiet choice unlocked the rest of my life. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever believed you had to sacrifice yourself just to keep your family together, share this video. Someone in your life might need to hear it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Then I locked the front door, slipped the old brass key back into its little cedar box, and walked toward the water knowing that, for the first time in my life, I chose myself, and I finally came home.